The November afternoon fell over the city like a gray veil, and the Trader Joe's on the corner of Serrano Avenue was especially crowded. Sarah Miller waited in the checkout line, holding a basket with groceries for dinner and mentally calculating if she would make it in time to pick up Alex from his karate class. Her 12-year-old son had been practicing for 3 years and didn't want to miss a single training session under any circumstances. The instructor said the boy had real aptitude, and Sarah felt proud of her son. Alex was responsible, diligent, and never slacked off. She glanced at her watch, 6:30. If she paid quickly now, she'd arrive at the sports center just as his class was ending. David normally picked Alex up on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but now her husband was away on a business trip, and all the responsibilities fell on Sarah's shoulders. However, she was used to managing. Her job as an accountant at a commercial firm had taught her to plan with precision and keep dozens of tasks under control simultaneously. The line moved slowly in front of her. An elderly woman was placing her groceries on the conveyor belt with painstaking slowness, then searched for her wallet in her purse with the same lack of hurry. Sarah waited patiently, mentally reviewing her to-do list for the evening. Pick up her son, heat up dinner, check his math homework, wash his sports uniform. "Sarah, dear," a familiar voice rang out from behind her, and Sarah felt a gentle pat on her shoulder. She turned around and saw her neighbor, Evelyn Reed, who lived one floor up. The old woman was always up to date on all the neighborhood news and loved to chat about this and that. The neighbor had a kind and welcoming face, but her eyes always watched with a special curiosity, as if she saw more than she said. "Hello, Evelyn." Sarah nodded, trying to be polite, but without encouraging a long conversation. Her schedule was already tight, and chats with her neighbor could drag on. "Oh, you look so serious." The neighbor laughed, squeezing closer and placing her basket next to Sarah's. "We've been living next to each other for years. How are things? Isn't work overwhelming you?" "Thanks, everything's fine. It's a lot of work, but I'm managing," Sarah smiled, hoping the conversation would end there. "And you're David. How is he?" "I haven't seen him around the neighborhood in a while," Evelyn continued, pulling a package of cookies from her basket and examining the label. "David's fine, too," Sarah replied mechanically, moving her basket forward with the line. The neighbor nodded, but her smile grew even wider, as if she knew some secret Sarah didn't. The woman fell silent, then leaned in closer, lowering her voice to a confidential whisper. "When was the last time you were at the cabin?" The question was so sudden and unexpected that Sarah was taken aback. "The cabin?" she asked, frowning. "We haven't been in a long time. 2 years, maybe even more. We never have time for anything, and besides, it's neglected. David always says he'll go in the summer, fix things up, maybe repair the roof, but it always gets postponed." Sarah was telling the truth. The cabin had come to them from David's parents, a small house in a development about 25 miles from the city. They used to go every weekend. Alex was little, running around the property, helping water the garden beds, but in recent years the house had been abandoned. There was no time, and not much desire either. The city absorbed all their attention. "Go today," Evelyn said, her voice turning completely serious, losing its previous chatty lightness. "But at night, to give your husband a surprise." Sarah had already opened her mouth to object, "But my husband is on a trip." However, she stopped herself in time. The words got stuck in her throat. Something in Evelyn's tone, in the way she had pronounced that phrase, made Sarah fall silent and think, the neighbor couldn't have known that David had left. Sarah hadn't mentioned it. Therefore, it wasn't about any surprise. It was about something else, something Evelyn knew but didn't want to or couldn't say directly. "At night?" Sarah asked slowly, trying to catch her neighbor's gaze and understand what was hidden behind those words. "Exactly. At night," Evelyn confirmed with a meaningful nod. "You'll understand when you get there. You won't regret it." And she said nothing more. She simply turned and went to another checkout line that was shorter, leaving Sarah completely bewildered. What was that? What surprise? And why specifically at night? Why such a strange insistence? Sarah paid automatically, put her groceries in bags, and left the store, but her thoughts were far from the products. She got into her car, started the engine, and went to pick up Alex, but the conversation with her neighbor wouldn't leave her mind. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Sarah picked up her son from training. Alex was cheerful, telling her about a new technique they had been practicing, but she was only half listening. At home, she heated up dinner and sat across from her son at the table, but the food seemed tasteless. Then she helped Alex with his math homework percentage problems that were quite difficult for his age, but the boy managed them well. "Mom, why are you so thoughtful?" Alex asked, putting down his pen and looking at her attentively. Her son had always been perceptive. He could sense when something was wrong, when his parents were worried or hiding something. Sarah knew it was hard to hide anything from him. "I'm just tired from work," she lied with a smile. "There have been a lot of reports. Nothing serious." Alex looked at her for a few more seconds as if checking if she was telling the truth. Then he nodded and returned to his problems. Sarah felt guilty. She didn't like lying to her son, but right now she simply didn't know what to tell him. She herself didn't yet understand what was happening. When Alex went to bed, Sarah was still sitting in the kitchen, finishing her tea. She tried to convince herself that the neighbor had just made a bad joke or was mistaken. Maybe she had seen squatters at the cabin and wanted to warn her. But then, why the strange hint about a surprise for her husband? Her intuition, that same female intuition that Sarah was accustomed to not ignoring, was telling her something completely different. Something was wrong. At 9:30 p.m., Sarah made a decision. She couldn't just sit around guessing. She needed to go and find out for herself. She peeked into Alex's room. The boy was sleeping, curled up under the blanket, hugging his pillow. Sarah closed the door gently, wrote a note, and left it on the kitchen table. "Had to go out for an urgent matter. I'll be back in the morning. Don't worry, Mom." She grabbed her car keys, her phone, put on her jacket, and set off. The drive to the cabin took just under an hour. Sarah drove along the dark highway, illuminated only by the headlights of her old Honda Civic, trying to come up with at least some explanation for what was happening. Her thoughts were jumbled, piling on top of one another. Maybe something had happened at the house. It had been broken into. But then, why would the neighbor talk about a surprise for her husband who was away on a trip? Oh no, David wasn't like that. They had been married for 15 years, and he had never given her a reason to be jealous. He was a kind, honest man, a bit soft-hearted, sometimes too receptive to others' requests, but he always strived for his family. When Sarah turned onto the dirt road leading to their property, she saw something that made her slam on the brakes. Light was glowing in the cabin windows, not a dim, barely perceptible light, but a bright, yellow, living light, as if people were living in the house. Smoke was coming from the chimney. Someone was using the stove. On the muddy path in front of the gate, there were fresh tire tracks and many footprints from boots of different sizes. Sarah got out of the car, feeling her heart pound. The cold November air hit her face. She slowly approached the fence and stopped, peering into the darkness. On a clothesline strung between two trees in the yard, children's clothes were hanging. Small pants, a brightly colored jacket, tiny socks. The wind swayed them slightly, and it looked absurdly peaceful and at the same time unsettling. Someone was living there. Someone had settled into their cabin as if it were their own home. Sarah slowly opened the gate. It creaked loudly, and immediately, voices could be heard from inside the house. First, a man's deep, tired alert, then a woman's soft, worried, and a child's cry, thin, plaintive, like the sob of a small child. She went up to the porch. The steps were clean, freshly swept. Next to the door were rubber boots, a man's and a woman's. Sarah pushed the door, expecting it to be locked, but it opened easily. The room that used to serve as a living room was warm and cozy. Against the wall was an old sofa covered with a clean quilt. On the floor was a children's playmat with toys, plastic blocks, a teddy bear, several small cars. Next to the stove, which radiated a pleasant warmth, sat a young woman in her early 30s, thin, pale, with disheveled blonde hair, holding a small child in her arms. The little boy was sobbing, burying his face in his mother's shoulder. Nearby, by the table, stood a tall, broad-shouldered but sad-looking man. He was wearing an old work jacket. His jeans were dirty, as if he had just come back from somewhere. Both of them froze when they saw Sarah. The woman instinctively clutched the child tighter, and the man took a step forward, as if to protect his family. "Who are you?" he asked in a hoarse voice, and there was fear in his tone. Sarah opened her mouth to answer, but at that moment, from the side room, which used to be a storage closet, another person emerged, a tall, painfully familiar silhouette. David, her husband, the same man who was supposed to be on a business trip 200 miles away, stopped short upon seeing his wife, and his face turned pale as if he had seen a ghost. For a second, he stood motionless, then took a step toward his wife. Sarah exhaled, her voice trembling. Sarah looked at him, and the world around her seemed to freeze. There he was, her husband, in an old sweater she had washed just last week, with a guilty and bewildered expression on his face. And next to him, a strange family living in their house, in their cabin, as if they had every right to be there. She didn't recognize him, not because he had changed physically, but because he had built an entire secret life here, on their land, in their cabin, without her knowledge. He had hidden it for weeks, maybe months. He had lied about business trips. And now he stood before her like a little boy caught misbehaving. "David," Sarah said slowly, her voice sounding cold and firm, though inside everything was boiling with anger and confusion. "Explain to me what is happening here. Right now. Immediately." The silence in the room lasted for a minute. Sarah stood in the doorway, looking at her husband and waiting. David lowered his eyes, then raised them again to his wife, and in his gaze was the pain of a person who had cornered himself and now didn't know how to get out. "Sarah, he began, but broke off, unable to find the right words. "Speak," Sarah cut him off. "Right now. Who are these people? Why are they living in our cabin? And why did you lie to me about the business trip?" David sighed heavily and nodded toward the man still standing defensively by the table. "This is Mike. Mike Sullivan, my friend. We've known each other since childhood. He was like a brother to me. Then we drifted apart, lost touch, and now we've reconnected." Sarah shifted her gaze to the stranger. Mike looked utterly exhausted, with deep lines on his forehead, sunken cheeks, and hands covered in calluses and scratches. He was a man who worked himself to the bone and hadn't had a proper rest in a long time. "And this is Jessica, his wife," David continued, nodding toward the woman with the child, "and their son, Sam. He's 3. Jessica carefully stood up from the sofa, still holding the little boy close. The child had stopped crying but was sniffling, looking at Sarah with big, frightened eyes. The woman was very thin, almost emaciated. Her eyes held a mixture of fear and despair. "Hello," Jessica said softly. "Please, forgive us. We didn't want to." "Wait." Sarah held up a hand, stopping her. "Let my husband speak first. David, I'm listening, and I need the truth. The whole truth." David nodded, walked over to the table, and sank heavily into a chair. Mike sat across from him, and Jessica remained standing, rocking her son. "I wanted to do the right thing," David began, his voice filled with guilt. "I thought I could handle everything myself, without bothering you. I thought it would be for a short time. Without bothering me." Sarah felt something snap inside her. "You've housed strangers in our cabin. You've lied to me about business trips, and you call that not bothering me? Speak plainly. What happened?" Mike raised his head and looked at Sarah. There was so much pain in his eyes that she involuntarily took a step back. "It's my fault," he said in a rough voice. "It all started a year ago. My father was diagnosed with cancer, stage 4. The doctors in the States said they couldn't help him. He needed an operation abroad. Expensive. Very expensive." He fell silent. Jessica closed her eyes, and a tear slid down her cheek. "I started looking for money," Mike continued. "I went to every bank, but they all turned me down. My credit history wasn't ideal, and my salary wasn't enough for that amount. I was desperate. My father was dying, and I couldn't do anything." "And you borrowed from other people?" Sarah said softly, beginning to understand. "People who lend money without asking too many questions?" Mike nodded. "I knew it was dangerous. But there was no other way. They gave me $250,000, with huge interest, of course, but they gave it to me." David sat with his head down, silent. Sarah moved closer, sitting in a chair across from the men. "And what happened next?" she asked, though she already guessed. "We went to Germany," Mike continued, his voice trembling. "They did the surgery. My father went through hell. The doctors fought for 3 months, but he died anyway. The cancer turned out to be too aggressive. The metastases had spread further. We spent all the money, the whole $250,000, and we couldn't save my father. Jessica sobbed, burying her face in her son's hair. Sam stirred in her arms, and she quietly sang him a lullaby to calm him. I buried my father in our hometown, Mike sighed. And then the worst part began. The people I borrowed from started demanding repayment. With interest, the debt grew to $400,000. I tried to explain that I needed time, that I would pay it back gradually, but they wouldn't listen. They came to our apartment, Jessica interjected, her words like a whisper. They threatened us. They said if we didn't pay back the money, then not only Mike would suffer, but me and Sam too. They gave us 1 month. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She had heard stories like this, read about them in the news, but she never thought she would encounter it so closely. We sold our condo, Mike continued, a 2-bedroom in a decent neighborhood. We got $250,000 for it, paid that back, and we were still left with $150,000, Mike said. Exactly $150,000 left. I pay them back a little each month, but the interest eats up everything. It's a vicious cycle. Sarah turned to him. And why isn't your wife working? Jessica flinched at the direct question. I've tried. I have a degree in economics, she said quietly. But Sam gets sick often. Bronchitis, colds. He has a weak immune system. We can't put him in daycare. Why? Because we're scared. Scared of what? Of them finding us. Mike clenched his jaw. If we enroll him in daycare, we'd have to provide a registration address, submit documents, and those people have their contacts. They can check, find out where we are. And then, he didn't finish, but Sarah understood. They were hiding. They were living in this cabin like on a deserted island, trying not to attract attention. Do you even have a plan? Sarah asked, looking at Mike. Or are you just hoping $150,000 will appear out of thin air? I work. Mike straightened up, a note of pride in his voice. During the day, in construction, I make about $4,000 a month. At night, driving, I can make another $2,000, maybe $3,000 if I'm lucky. That's about $7,000 a month. After expenses for food and medicine for Sam, we have about $4,000 left. I pay them $2,500 every month. I figure in about 5 years, I can close the debt. 5 years, Sarah repeated. And you think they'll wait? They promised they wouldn't touch us as long as I pay. Mike shrugged. They have my word. I pay on time. I haven't missed a single payment. Sarah looked at David, then at Mike and Jessica. Little Sam had fallen asleep in his mother's arms. His face was pale, with dark circles under his eyes. Even in his sleep, he looked sickly. What about your father's house? Sarah asked. Mike mentioned a house in his hometown. We sold the old house in the village. Mike smiled bitterly. Right after the funeral. We got $50,000, and someone advised me to invest that money in an investment company. They promised that in 6 months, the sum would double or even triple. I believed them because I was desperate, because I wanted to pay off the debts faster. And you lost everything, Sarah finished for him. The company turned out to be a pyramid scheme, Mike nodded. It closed down 2 months later. All the money vanished. The owners disappeared. We filed a report, but it was no use. We just lost the last thing we had. Jessica was crying silently, turned toward the wall. Her shoulders shook, but she made no sound, trying not to wake her son. Sarah stood in the middle of the room, feeling 2 conflicting emotions warring inside her. On one hand, anger at her husband for the lie, for making such a decision without her. On the other, the understanding that these were people truly in trouble. Not through their own fault, not out of stupidity or laziness. They tried to save a dying father, and it turned into a catastrophe. How do you earn $150,000? She said aloud, and everyone looked at her. That's the question, isn't it? Mike nodded slowly. I think about it every day, he said. Every second. But there's no answer. Sarah paced the room, her hands clasped behind her back. Her brain had already switched into its usual mode: analyze, find solutions, build a plan. This was how she dealt with problems at work. She turned chaos into order. She found ways out of difficult situations. "All right then," she said firmly, stopping in the middle of the room. "David and I will discuss this later. That's a family matter, and we will sort it out. But right now, something else is more important. We need a plan, a real, viable plan for how to close this debt and get you out of this hole." David lifted his head, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Sarah, are you serious?" "Absolutely," Sarah straightened up. "But be warned, I will only help on one condition: no more lies, complete honesty. If I find out you're hiding something again, it's over. The help stops." "Understood." Mike and Jessica nodded simultaneously. "Understood," Mike breathed out. "Thank you. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. There's going to be a lot of work, and I'm not promising everything will work out, but we will try." She looked at her watch. It was already past midnight. She needed to get back home to Alex, but a plan was already forming in her head. The first steps, the first actions. "I'll be back tomorrow," Sarah said, heading for the door. "I'll bring some necessities. In the meantime, just stay put. And Mike, keep working as you have been. Every dollar is important now." She stepped out onto the porch, and David followed her. "Sarah," he grabbed her hand. "Forgive me. I really wanted to do the right thing." Sarah gave him a long look. "We'll talk about this at home." "And not tonight. Right now, I want to be alone and think," she said calmly. "But remember this, once and for all, secrets, for the greater good, are still lies. And that kind of lie destroys trust more than any hard truth." She got in her car and drove off, leaving her husband standing on the porch of the lit-up cabin. In the rearview mirror, Sarah saw him watching her go, and she knew the conversation between them was still going to be a serious one. But for now, the main question was different: how to earn, in a reasonable time frame, $150,000 and save a family from creditors who don't forgive debts. The next morning, Sarah woke up before her alarm. She had barely slept. Thoughts swirled in her head, forming logical chains, breaking the situation down into its components. She lay there, staring at the ceiling, methodically thinking through each step of the future plan. Alex was already up and getting ready for school. Sarah went into the kitchen where her son was sitting at the table with a bagel and a history textbook, reviewing before a test. "Good morning," she said, pouring herself a coffee. "Hey, Mom." Alex looked up. "Where did you go last night?" "I woke up, and you were gone." The boy was watching her closely, searchingly. He always sensed when his parents were hiding something, and Sarah knew that deceiving him was practically impossible. "I went to the cabin," she answered honestly, "for an urgent matter. Everything's fine, don't worry." "And Dad, when is he coming back from his business trip?" Soon, Sarah took a sip of coffee, feeling a bitterness that wasn't just from the drink. Maybe even tonight. It wasn't a lie. David needed to come home, and they had to have a serious talk about trust, about family, about how important it is to make decisions together, not alone. After seeing Alex off to school, Sarah got ready for work. The entire drive to the office, she was thinking about the details. She needed to act carefully so as not to harm Mike and his family, but at the same time, quickly and effectively. The workday began with a meeting. Sarah participated in the discussion of quarterly reports, answered colleagues' questions, but part of her mind was occupied with something completely different. When the meeting ended, she lingered in the hallway and waited for Laura Evans, the head of accounting. Laura was a woman in her 40s, strict but fair. She had been leading the department for 10 years and was excellent not just with numbers, but with people too. Sarah knew that if anyone could help, it was her. "Laura, can I have a word with you?" Sarah caught up with her boss. "Of course, Sarah. Problems with the reports?" Laura stopped, looking at her attentively. "No, work matters are fine. I just wanted to ask about something. Do we have any openings for remote accounting clerks?" Laura frowned, thinking, "We do. We usually hire for primary documentation, processing invoices, reconciliations. It's not the most complex work, but it requires attention to detail. Why? Is a friend of yours looking for a job?" "Yes," Sarah nodded. A good person. With a degree. She just can't work in an office right now, young child. Gets sick often. You know how it is. Laura thoughtfully tapped her fingers on her folder. I understand. Actually, one of our girls just went on maternity leave. A position has opened up. Salary is $45,000 a year. We can give it a try. Have her send her resume to my email. I'll take a look. But Sarah, you understand you're vouching for this person? If something goes wrong, it will reflect on you too. I understand, Sarah replied seriously. I'll answer for her. All right. I'll expect the resume by the end of the week. Sarah thanked her boss and returned to her desk. First step taken. Now she needed to handle the rest. During her lunch break, she called David. Sarah, her husband's voice sounded tired and guilty. How are you? How's Alex? We're fine. Listen, you need to come home today. We need to talk. Seriously. I understand. I'll be there around 6. Good. And one more thing, Sarah continued. I need the contact info for those people Mike owes money to. Not to meet them, just to understand who we're dealing with. David was silent, then sighed heavily. Sarah, it's dangerous. It's necessary, David. I'm not going to meet them or call them. I just want to know. Information is power. You should understand that. Okay, I'll ask Mike. I'll give it to you tonight. After work, Sarah stopped by a hardware store and bought an Ethernet cable, several outlets, and a power strip. Then she called the local cable company and arranged for a home internet installation at the cabin. The representative said the installation could be done the day after tomorrow. With luck, tomorrow. Sarah agreed to any nearby date and prepaid for the installation service. At home, she pulled her old laptop out of the storage closet. It was a reliable workhorse she had used for 2 years until she bought a newer, more expensive, and powerful one. The laptop still worked perfectly. Sarah sometimes turned it on to check old files. Now it would be useful for Jessica's work. David arrived in the evening. He looked exhausted, with a dull look in his eyes. Alex was happy to see his father. He ran to hug him, but Sarah said briefly, Alex, go to your room and finish your homework. Your father and I need to talk. The boy grew alert, looking from his mother to his father, but he obeyed and went to his room, closing the door. Sarah and David sat in the kitchen, facing each other. A wall of mistrust stood between them, and Sarah knew it had to be torn down. Right now. I'm angry with you, she began without preamble. Very angry. You lied to me. You made a decision that affects our whole family, and you didn't consult me. As if my opinion doesn't matter. David lowered his head. I was scared. Scared of what? That I would say no? That I would refuse? Sarah leaned forward. David, we're husband and wife. We've been together for 15 years. And if you don't trust me enough to tell me about such an important decision, what does that say about our marriage? I do trust you. David looked up, tears welling in his eyes. It's just that you're always so proper, so logical. You know how to analyze, to weigh the risks. And I knew the risks were huge, that getting mixed up in these kinds of debts is dangerous. I was afraid you'd say no, and I couldn't just abandon Mike, and so you decided to deceive me. I didn't want to deceive you. I wanted to solve it all myself, quickly, so you wouldn't even find out. That's the problem, David. You think you're protecting me by hiding the truth, but in reality, you're just not giving me the right to choose. You decide for me, and that's not right. I understand, he finally said. You're right, completely right. Please, forgive me. I won't do it again. You promise? I promise. I swear. Sarah nodded. The anger hadn't completely subsided, but she felt that her husband was being sincere, and now was not the time for a lengthy rehashing of their relationship. Now, they needed to act. All right, then listen to the plan. She pulled out a notebook where all the steps were already written down. Tomorrow or the day after, internet installers will come to the cabin. I've already paid for everything. Jessica needs a computer to work. I'm giving her my old laptop. It works. All the necessary software is installed. David listened without interrupting. I've spoken with Laura about a position for Jessica. Remote work, primary accounting. Salary is $45,000 a year, but it's stable, on-the-books income. Official. Sarah, are you serious? David couldn't believe his ears. Absolutely. But there are conditions. Jessica must send her resume by the end of the week. She has to be prepared to work responsibly, without mistakes, because I'm recommending her, and if she messes up, it will affect me too. She'll manage, David said confidently. She has the degree. She worked before Sam was born. She just hasn't had the chance these last few years. Good. Then tomorrow I'll go to the cabin, take the laptop, set everything up. I'll show Jessica how to connect to her work email, how to use the programs. David reached across the table and took his wife's hand. Thank you. Thank you so much. Sarah squeezed his fingers in return, but her face remained serious. Don't thank me yet. This is just the beginning. There's a lot of work ahead, and one more thing. I need information on those people Mike owes. David reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. Mike gave me the details. The main guy is Vic Gallo. He's 45, a former boxer. Now he's like an enforcer for a group of lenders, not the top guy, but influential enough. Here's his phone number. Sarah took the paper, studying it carefully. Mike communicates with him. Once a month, he calls, says he's made the next interest payment. Gallo hasn't been putting on much pressure so far because the money comes in regularly, but he warned that if there's even one delay, there will be problems. Understood. Sarah tucked the paper into her notebook. So, the main task is to prevent any delays and try to close the debt as quickly as possible. But how? David looked at his wife hopefully. Mike earns at most $7,000 a month, of which $2,500 goes to the debt. That leaves $4,500 for a family of 3 for food, for medicine, for Sam. Jessica will bring in another $3,750 a month, but expenses will also grow. Utilities, internet. I've calculated it. Sarah opened the notebook to a page with her calculations. If Jessica works remotely, she can save almost her entire salary since the main expenses are already covered by Mike. Mike pays $2,500 for the debt interest, plus saving Jessica's monthly salary of around $3,000 for $150,000. That's actually a little over 4 years. David put his head in his hands. 4 years. God, that's a long time. It's better than never, Sarah said sharply. And that's on the condition that they work honestly, don't spend on nonsense, and save every dollar. The next day, Sarah took a day off from work and went to the cabin. David went with her. He had arranged to take a day off as well. In the trunk were the laptop, cables, and also bags of groceries. Sarah had bought grains, pasta, canned goods, and baby food for Sam. When they arrived at the cabin, Mike was in the yard, chopping firewood. Jessica was inside, washing children's clothes by hand in a large basin. Seeing the car, they both stopped their chores and came out to meet them. Hello. Jessica's face showed a mixture of hope and fear. Hello. Sarah got out of the car and took out the bag with the laptop. Jessica, we need to talk seriously. They went inside the house. Sam was sleeping on the sofa, covered with a warm blanket. Sarah sat at the table and placed the laptop in front of her. I've found a job for you, she began without preamble. Remote, accounting, primary documents. Salary is $45,000 a year. Official. Jessica covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes filling with tears. Is it true? She whispered. Is it really true? But there are conditions. You must send your resume to my boss by the end of the week. You must work well, without mistakes. You must be available during business hours, respond to emails quickly, and complete tasks on time. I will, Jessica nodded, wiping away tears. I'll do whatever it takes. I swear. And one more thing. Sarah opened the laptop. No one can know where you live. No social media, no photos of the house online, minimal digital footprint. Understand? I understand. We already try to keep a low profile as it is. Sarah spent the next 2 hours explaining how to use the accounting software. Jessica absorbed the information like a sponge, writing everything down in a notebook, asking questions when something wasn't clear. You'll do fine, Sarah said at the end, closing the laptop. I can see you're a quick learner. Thank you. Jessica took Sarah's hand in hers. "Thank you for everything. I don't know how to thank you." "Work well," Sarah freed her hand. "That will be the best thanks." Just then, a white van with the cable company's logo pulled up to the house. A man in a work uniform got out with a toolbox. "Hi, I'm here for the internet installation," he said, approaching the porch. "Yes, we're expecting you." Sarah went out to meet him. "Come in. I'll show you where everything needs to be set up." The technician worked quickly and professionally. He ran the cable from the pole to the house, installed the router, and configured the connection. In 2 hours, everything was ready. The internet was stable, with enough speed for remote work. "All set, you can use it," the technician said, packing up his tools. "If there are any problems, call the support line. The number is in the contract." Sarah signed the documents. The technician left, and the women returned to setting up the laptop and email. While the women were busy with the laptop, David and Mike worked on the property. David inspected the house and realized a lot needed to be done. Insulate the windows, patch the roof, check the wiring. If the Sullivan family was going to live there for a long time, they needed normal living conditions, especially for the child. "I'll bring materials," David said, examining a cracked window pane. "I'll come this weekend, and we'll take care of the repairs." "I can do it myself," Mike started, but David stopped him. "It's faster with 2 of us." They worked until evening. When it was time to leave, Sarah reminded Jessica once more about the resume by the end of the week. "Don't forget." "I won't. I promise." On the way home, David was quiet, gripping the steering wheel. Sarah looked out the window at the passing scenery and thought about the long road ahead. A lot of work, a lot of tension, constant risk, but would they make it? They had to. Because when people don't abandon each other, when they work tirelessly for a common goal, then even $150,000 stops seeming like an insurmountable sum. Sarah took her husband's hand, and he gratefully squeezed her fingers. "Everything will be all right," she said softly. "Yes," David replied. "It will be." 3 months had passed since Jessica started working remotely. The February morning was frosty but sunny. Sarah was sitting at her desk in the office, checking her email, when the phone rang. It was Laura Evans. "Sarah, could you come see me, please?" The boss's voice sounded serious. Sarah felt a pang of anxiety. Over these months, Jessica had made a few small mistakes. She had mixed up account numbers, forgotten to include sales tax on some documents. Each time, Sarah had helped her correct them, explaining exactly where the inaccuracy was. But what if something serious had happened now? She knocked on Laura's office door and went in. The boss was sitting at her desk. In front of her was a printed spreadsheet with reconciliations. "Sit down," Laura gestured to a chair. "I want to talk about your protégé." "Did Jessica mess something up?" Sarah asked directly, preparing for the worst. "On the contrary," Laura looked up, a faint smile on her face. "This past month, she hasn't made a single mistake. All documents processed perfectly. Reconciliations matched down to the cent. She even found an error in documents that came from a client and reported it in time. That saved us from potential trouble with the IRS." Sarah let out a breath of relief. "I'm glad to hear that. I want to give her a raise," Laura continued, "to $50,000. She's earned it. Let her know." "Thank you, Laura. I'll tell her." That evening, Sarah called Jessica and told her the news. On the other end of the line, she heard a happy sob. "Really?" Jessica's voice trembled with joy. "Really. You're doing great. Keep it up. Thank you. Thank you for everything you're doing for us." The raise meant that Jessica could now save not just her base take-home, but a bit more each month. This would shorten the debt repayment period by several more months, Sarah recalculated in her notebook. It turned out that at this rate, they could close the debt sooner, but life, as always, had its own tests in store. In mid-March, Sam got sick. At first, it was a common cold, a runny nose, a slight fever. But 2 days later, the boy got worse. His fever shot up to 103. A harsh cough developed. Jessica called a doctor to the house, the district physician from the nearest clinic. The doctor examined the boy and frowned. "Bronchitis. He needs antibiotics, inhalers, bed rest, and you must monitor his temperature. If it goes above 103.5, call 911 immediately." Jessica nodded, writing down the names of the medications. When the doctor left, she called Mike at work. "Mike, Sam is really sick. He needs expensive medicine. About $300, I think." Mike was silent for a few seconds, and Jessica could hear his heavy breathing. "Okay, I'll go to the pharmacy now. We'll buy everything he needs," but buying the medicine meant that they wouldn't be able to save the usual amount for the debt that month. $300 was a lot for their budget. Jessica sat by her sick son's bed and cried silently so Sam wouldn't see. That night, she called Sarah and told her the situation. "I don't know what to do." Jessica's voice was full of despair. "The boy needs medicine, but then we won't make the full payment to Gallo." And he warned that any delay— "Jessica, stop," Sarah interrupted her. "How much are you short?" $300. "I'll transfer it to you right now. Give me your account number." "No, I can't take money from you," Jessica protested. "You already do so much." "Jessica, listen to me carefully," Sarah's voice became stern. "This isn't a handout. It's an investment to help you get out of this. If you don't make the payment on time, it will cause problems that will cost much more. Do you understand?" "I understand," Jessica whispered. "Then don't argue. I'll send it now. You can pay me back when you can. No interest, no rush." 5 minutes later, the money was transferred. Jessica sat with her phone in her hands, staring at the screen, unable to believe her eyes. She hadn't expected such support. But Sam's illness turned out to be more serious than they thought. The antibiotics weren't helping. His temperature remained high. A week later, the doctor returned and said he needed to be hospitalized. "The boy has complications. It could develop into pneumonia. It's safer in the hospital." Jessica packed their things, and Mike drove her and Sam to the city hospital. The boy was admitted to the pediatric ward, and Jessica stayed with him. This meant she couldn't work. The laptop was back at the cabin. There was no internet at the hospital, and no time to work either. Jessica sat by her son's bed, who was either sleeping or crying, and felt everything falling apart. She called Sarah and tearfully explained the situation. "I can't work. Sam's in the hospital. I don't know how long we'll be here. A week, maybe 2. I've ruined everything. I'm going to lose my job." "You won't lose it," Sarah said firmly. "I'll talk to Laura now. You go on medical leave, and I'll cover your work temporarily." "How?" "I'll do my part and yours. I'll manage. The most important thing is for Sam to get better." Sarah kept her promise. For the next 2 weeks, she worked for 2. She arrived at the office at 8 a.m. and left at 10 p.m. At home, she reviewed documents she hadn't managed to process during the day. Alex barely saw his mother. She would come home when he was already asleep and leave before he woke up. David tried to help around the house, cooking dinners, checking his son's homework. He saw how exhausted his wife was, but understood that she was doing what she believed was right. "Maybe that's enough," he asked one night when Sarah was again at the computer past midnight. "You're going to burn yourself out." "It's not Jessica's fault her son got sick," Sarah replied without looking up from the screen. "If I back down now, she'll lose her job. And losing her job means losing the ability to pay off the debt. I can't let that happen." 2 weeks later, Sam was discharged. Pneumonia had been avoided, but the boy was weak and pale. The doctors recommended rest, vitamins, and no strenuous activity. Jessica returned to the cabin, and that same day wrote Sarah a long thank you letter. Then she sat down at the laptop and started catching up on her accumulated tasks. She worked late into the night until her eyes started to close. Mike, during this time, barely slept. He continued to work construction from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. and then went out for his night shift driving. He would get home at 2 a.m., sleep for a few hours, and then leave again. One Saturday morning, he couldn't get out of bed. He physically just couldn't. His body refused to obey. Jessica got scared. She wanted to call a doctor, but Mike stopped her. "No need. Just let me sleep. I'm tired." He slept for almost a full day. When he woke up, the first thing he reached for was his phone. How many driving shifts had he missed? How much money had he lost? Jessica took the phone from him. "Enough," she said firmly. "You'll kill yourself working like this. We need a living husband and father. Mike looked at his wife and suddenly broke down. He cried, burying his face in her shoulder. He cried like a child, releasing all the accumulated fatigue, fear, and despair. "I can't stop," he sobbed. "If I stop, we won't pay. And if we don't pay, they'll come. And then nothing." Jessica stroked his head. "Because we're not alone. We have Sarah and David. They're helping us. We'll get through this. But only if you don't work yourself to death." After that conversation, Mike reduced his night driving shifts to 5 times a week instead of 7. It reduced their income, but at least he got some sleep on the weekends. David, seeing his friend at his limit, took on some of the work at the cabin. Every weekend, he would go there and, together with Mike, they would repair, fix, and improve things. They insulated all the windows, sealed the cracks in the walls, fixed the roof, and installed an electric heater in the room where Sam slept. "If you're going to live here for another year, it should at least be warm," David would say. Spring gave way to summer. Sam grew stronger. He stopped getting sick so often. Jessica continued to work. Laura valued her diligence and responsibility. Mike worked construction and drove. They saved every penny. Mike punctually made the payments every month, and Vic Gallo, for the time being, showed no signs of discontent. Autumn passed in tense waiting. Every month Mike made the payments, and every month Gallo confirmed receipt. By this time, Alex already knew that his father's friend's family was living at the cabin. Sarah decided there was no point in hiding it from her 12-year-old son. He sensed and understood everything anyway. She sat down with him and told him the truth. Not everything, but the main points: that the family had fallen on hard times, that they needed help, that it was important. "Are they good people?" Alex asked. "Good people," Sarah nodded. "They just had a misfortune. And you don't abandon people in misfortune. I understand." The boy was silent for a moment. "And they have a kid?" "Yes, a little boy, 3 years old. His name is Sam. Maybe we can go visit them sometime," Alex proposed unexpectedly. "I can play with him. He's probably bored all by himself." Sarah looked at her son and felt a surge of pride. Just like that, without any unnecessary words, a 12-year-old teenager showed more compassion and understanding than many adults. Almost 2 years had passed since that first meeting at the cabin. Mike made the last major payment. Only $5,000 remained on the account until the debt was fully paid off. He called Gallo and said, "In 1 month, I'll close out the debt completely." Gallo was silent. Then he chuckled. "Well done, Sullivan. I didn't expect you to pull it off. Most people break halfway through, but you did it." "I wasn't alone," Mike replied quietly. "I had help. Then you got lucky with your people. I'll expect the final payment. And after that, we're square." When Mike told Jessica about this conversation, she cried with relief. They hugged and stood there for a long time, without saying a word. Sam ran up to them and hugged both his parents with his little arms. There was light at the end of the tunnel, freedom from debt, the chance to start a new life. November turned out to be surprisingly warm. The cabin was awash in the yellow-brown colors of late autumn. Mike made the final payment, and Vic Gallo sent him a short text message. "We're square. Good luck." Simple words, but they signified the end of an entire era of fear and tension. Mike showed the message to Jessica, and they just sat on the sofa, holding hands, unable to believe the nightmare was really over. "We're free," Jessica whispered. "Really free. Yes." Mike hugged his wife. "Thanks to Sarah and David. We wouldn't have made it without them." Sam was playing on the floor with a set of building blocks that Alex had given him for his birthday. The boy had grown, gotten stronger, and stopped getting sick so often. The fresh air, regular walks, and calm environment had done him good. But freedom from debt didn't mean they could relax. The Sullivan family was still living in the cabin. They still had nowhere else to go. However, now it wasn't a forced measure but a conscious choice. They agreed with Sarah and David that they would live there for another year, take care of the house and garden, pay for utilities, and save money for a down payment on a mortgage. Jessica continued to work remotely, and her salary had grown to $60,000 a year. Laura often praised her to Sarah, saying that such a responsible and attentive employee was hard to find. Mike stopped driving at night. Now he only worked construction during the day, earning a stable $5,000 a month. The family's total income was around $9,000 a month. Of this, they spent about $3,500 on living expenses, food, clothes for Sam, who was growing quickly, medicine, utilities, internet. The other $5,500 they saved. In a year and a half, we'll save up for a down payment. Mike calculate done evening, sitting with a calculator. $99,000. That should be enough for a 2-bedroom condo in a new building on the outskirts. I hope everything works out. Jessica crossed herself. I can no longer believe that things can just go well. They will, Mike said confidently. We've earned it. Sarah and David regularly visited the family at the cabin. David came to help with repairs. Together with Mike, they painted the fence, fixed the gate, and built a small playground for Sam. Sarah brought groceries, books for Jessica, and toys for the boy. Alex often came with his parents, too. He became friends with Sam, despite the age difference. The teenager gladly played with the little one, taught him how to do puzzles, and read children's books aloud to him. For Alex, it was a chance to be the older brother he never had. Sam loves them so much, Jessica would say to Sarah. He's always asking when Alex is coming. Sarah would smile. This friendship between the boys seemed to her one of the best outcomes of this whole story. Not the money, not the debt, but the human bonds that had formed between the two families. In the spring of the following year, an event occurred that accelerated their plans. Mike was promoted at work, he became a site foreman, and his salary increased to $7,000 a month. This meant the family could now save even more. We'll save up faster, Mike happily reported to David over the phone. Maybe we can buy a place in a year. That's great news, buddy. David was sincerely happy for him. You guys are amazing, both of you. The summer passed in quiet, steady work. Jessica tended to the garden. They had their own tomatoes, cucumbers, and greens. This helped save on groceries, and the fresh vegetables were good for Sam. The boy got a tan, became strong and agile. He was no longer the pale, sickly child Sarah had first seen. Mike spent every day improving the property. He repaired the old shed, painted the house exterior, and built a new porch. The house, which had once been neglected and sad, now looked well cared for and cozy. You've made a real gem out of it, David said, looking over the renovated property. Sarah will be thrilled. It's a small payment for what you've done for us, Mike lowered his eyes. I still can't believe you helped us like that you didn't abandon us when things were at their worst. What else could we do? David clapped his friend on the shoulder. We're people, not animals. By the end of the year, Mike and Jessica had saved $110,000. It was enough for a down payment on a mortgage for a 2-bedroom condo on the outskirts of the city. They started looking at options, browsing listings, going to viewings, and consulting with Sarah, who helped check the legal cleanliness of the deals. In mid-December, they found a suitable option, a 2-bedroom apartment in a new building on the outskirts, 900 square feet, bright, with a good layout. Take it, Sarah said after studying the documents. The developer is reliable. The building is complete. Everything is clean. Mike and Jessica submitted the documents for a mortgage, and 2 weeks later, they received approval. They now had stable income, official employment, and most importantly, no debts to people who don't forgive delays. At the end of December, the Sullivan family moved into their apartment. Mike rented a small truck, and the whole family loaded up their few belongings. Sarah and David came to help with the move. Alex carried boxes with Sam's toys, and the little boy ran alongside, laughing happily. When everything was moved, they stood in the middle of the empty apartment, and Jessica couldn't hold back her tears. Our own, she whispered, looking around the rooms. We have our own home again. I thought this would never happen. Mike hugged his wife, and Sam immediately clung to his parents. Sarah watched this scene and felt a warmth in her chest. This was what it was all for, to work, to endure, to help so that a family could once again have a roof over their heads and live in peace. When the move was finished, Mike and Jessica went to the cabin one last time. They brought the keys. We don't know how to thank you, Mike said, handing the keys to David. You saved our family. Literally saved us. Without you, we would have been lost. David took the keys and said, If you ever want to come here in the summer to relax, please please do. We'll get together, have barbecues." "Really?" Jessica couldn't believe her ears. "Really," Sarah confirmed. "You've taken care of it. You've been good tenants. So consider that you have the right to come visit." Jessica threw her arms around Sarah. When it was time to say goodbye, Sam ran up to Alex and hugged him. "Alex, will you come visit?" the little boy asked. "Of course I will," Alex squatted down. "We're friends, right?" "Right," Sam beamed. Before leaving, Mike proposed, "Let's plant something in the spring. In memory of you living here, so something remains here at the house." David nodded. "We'll plant an apple tree in the spring," he said. "It will grow and bear fruit every year. As a reminder that a family was once saved here. The tree, from you." The Sullivans left after dark. Sarah stood by the cabin window, watching the taillights of the departing car. David came up from behind and hugged her by the shoulders. "You're amazing," he said. "You're the real deal." "We're amazing together," Sarah replied, leaning against her husband. "I couldn't have done it alone." David kissed her. "Forgive me for that lie. For hiding it all. I learned my lesson." "I know," Sarah turned to him. "The main thing is that we went through this together, and we became stronger." They returned to the city late that night. Alex was asleep in the back seat, covered with a blanket. Sarah looked at her son and thought about the lesson he had learned over these years, a lesson in compassion, responsibility, and the ability to help those in trouble. Months passed. The Sullivan family settled into their new apartment, worked, and saved money for early mortgage payments. Jessica became one of the most valuable employees at her company, and Laura often held her up as an example to others. Mike received another promotion and was now in charge of an entire crew of builders. Sam started preschool and quickly made friends with the other children. And in the spring, at the cabin, the two families planted an apple tree. 2 years later, it bore its first fruit small, a little tart, but real. Jessica came especially for the occasion, picked an apple, and brought it to Sarah. "Here," she said, handing her the fruit. "The first apple from our tree. It's for you." Sarah took the apple, turning it in her hands. It was uneven, with a dark spot on one side, but so alive, so real. Sometimes, a neglected place becomes a home where people learn to live, trust, and help each other again. The walls that seemed cold become filled with the warmth of human voices, children's laughter, the smell of freshly baked pie. What seemed like an end becomes a new beginning, perhaps not an easy one, but a real one. Sarah often thought about this, looking at the photos Jessica sent her every month. Here is Sam going to school with a big backpack on his shoulders. Here is Mike receiving a diploma at work for the best results of the month. Here is their new apartment decorated for Christmas. Each photograph was proof that their help had not been in vain, that people are capable of getting back on their feet even after the most terrible fall. David sometimes said he regretted that initial lie, hiding the truth, but Sarah always answered the same way. Mistakes teach us to be more honest, and difficulties make a family stronger. They went through this trial together and learned the most important thing, to trust each other completely, without reservation. And the cabin, which had once stood empty, became the beginning of a new life. A life without debt, without fear, with faith that good comes back around. And the apple tree by the fence grew, getting stronger every year, bearing more and more fruit, a reminder that true support is not measured in money, but in the willingness to walk alongside someone when they are struggling, and in the belief that everyone deserves a second chance.